Okay, in this final module, we're going to discuss analysis of governmental financial performance. Just a quick overview of what we're going to go over. We're going to go over the stakeholders who need to know uh, a governmental financial condition. What do they need to know? Some key terms that are used to describe government's financial health. And then there's three factors that we'll talk about that were developed by the ICMA, which we'll go over later: environmental, organizational, and financial factors, and then financial analysis. All right, so who is it that needs to know a government's financial condition? One are government managers, and they need to know, of course, because they need to know if the current level of services can be sustained. Next, bond investors and credit analysts, they need to know, can the government pay principal and interest on their debt? Legislatures and others who have oversight responsibility for governments are other stakeholders that need to know. And then there's citizens and taxpayers, of course. They need to know, they should know, but a lot of times their interests are just represented by watchdog groups. There are specific watchdog groups for governments, of course, and of course there's the media also that could be considered an intermediary for the citizens, looking out on behalf of the citizens. Now, what do they need to know? They need to know whether the government will continue as a viable entity and continue to provide the desired level of services that the citizens want in the future. And of course, the creditors again want to know if the debt service payments are going to be covered. And the legislators and citizens watchdog groups, they want to know if the government's in compliance with all laws and regulations. All right, some of the key terms describe. Oh, one other thing I wanted to go back to. There, I have two cities here. One is Baltimore, Maryland, on the first slide. Um, Two is Newark, New Jersey, on the third or fourth slide. So I just got through watching two television shows, great television shows, that were based in those two cities or around those two cities, and the first student to email me the correct television show. That they're older shows. I'll give you that hint. They're not current. They're older shows. They're not on anymore. But the first student, I'll give you 2 points on your lowest quiz score there. So anyway, key terms describing a government's financial health. First, financial position. This focuses on assets and liabilities that require cash. And again, we're talking about the short term here. And the key term to understand about financial position is liquidity. Can you pay your bills? Financial condition, that's more referring to a government's ability to meet its obligations to creditors as they become due, as well as maintaining service obligations to the citizenry, both now and in the future. That's getting into the key term there is solvency. Economic condition, that's more of a catch all term that GASB uses to describe a composite of the government's financial health. Its ability and willingness to meet its financial obligations and, of course, its service commitments. All right, so there's different types of solvency. There's cash solvency, the ability to generate enough cash to over a 30 or 60-day period to cover its bills. There is budgetary solvency, which is the same thing except we're talking about over a normal budgetary period, usually a fiscal year, to meet its expenditures and but not incur any deficits. And long run solvency, the ability to, in the long run, pay all the costs of doing business or running the government. And then service level solvency is, of course, the ability to provide services at the level and quality that the citizenry expects and that are desired for the health and safety and welfare of the community. So, if you're looking at it from the federal government's perspective, the federal government is, of course, cash solvent. They have the Federal Reserve, they can print money, they're never going to not pay a bill. They have the ability to pay bills when they're due with no problem. Budgetary solvency, they don't meet that, haven't met that in a long time since the beginning of the 2000s, I think, into the 90s during the dot-com boom, and capital gains revenues were pouring in. The government feds have run deficits, and they've run deficits for as far as the eye can see, really. Um, Long run solvency, that the federal government is also not really doing, because even if it's getting close to paying all its current bills, the federal government does not accrue the liabilities that are piling up for these long-term costs like Social Security and Medicare. So long-run solvency, for most of you, I would guess, in the class that may be younger, don't plan on seeing any Social Security. Don't include that in your financial projections, because it's not going to be there, at least not anywhere near its current form. So yeah, the government is not, feds are not long run solvent by most any measure. Service level solvency, that's usually the first thing that starts to take a hit by local governments. Is the creditors require that they meet these financial solvency goals. And so the service level solvency will often be the one of the first things that takes the hit. See the tagline for the Jefferson County Courthouse after the Jefferson County entered bankruptcy, which wasn't that great to begin with, but folks like to blame it on the bankruptcy, which I'm sure is a large part of it. But anyway, all right, so there's three factors that affect financial condition, and these were developed by the International City and Management Association, and happened after the New York City defaulted on its debt in the 1980s. The IMCA developed a set of 5 handbooks, and these handbooks help to evaluate the financial condition of government. These are environmental factors, organizational factors, and financial factors. We'll talk about each one of them in more detail. All right, first, environmental factors. The basic question here that we're asking is, are the resources adequate to meet citizens' demand for services? Okay, and so there's several factors. I'll go ahead and list them all out here. All right, so there's community needs and resources. These are like demographic type factors: population, age, income, employment. So age and population. If you have a small population and you have maybe a elderly population, that's going to impact the amount of services you have to provide. And if they're not a working age and not paying income taxes, or if the property values are low, or for instance in the city of Birmingham, where such a large amount of the property is owned by UAB that doesn't pay property taxes. Those kind of things are impact the community needs and resources aspect of these environmental factors that impact the government's ability to meet the citizens' demand for services. Intergovernmental constraints, these are mandates and restrictions on revenue. So a lot of states have laws that say basically, cities, do what you want to on property taxes, but don't go over this amount. Don't go over X number of mills, as a way to kind of, from the state level, make sure that your cities and towns aren't getting too far out of whack in terms of the overall friendly overall strategy that a state wants to take in terms of property tax levels, income tax levels, whatever. Okay, disaster risk, of course, goes without saying. That's the potential for natural disasters and local preparedness. So I've had folks do a paper on Nashville before. Nashville has gotten hit by some floods, but in general, it's at a much lower disaster risk than Miami, Florida, or New Orleans, that is below sea level, right? Political culture. This is the attitudes toward taxes and political processes, and it's the condition of the government. So when you're talking about attitudes toward taxes and political processes, you can have very, very conservative, free market type cities that don't want an income tax, don't want any tax increases, blah blah blah, and so those kind of things will impact your environmental factors there, and your ability to meet the citizens' needs, right? The external economic conditions, of course, no government can escape these. These are from the federal level, the state level. These type of national trends can impact the environmental factors greatly. All right, organizational factors. These are management practices and legislative policies. These influence the how these environmental factors affect the outcome of the fiscal policy decisions. And this is an indication of the willingness or the ability of the managers to make tough fiscal decisions. If you have a electorate that doesn't want to hear anything about an unfunded liability that's going to happen in the future, and by God, if you cut any current services, that's gonna it's gonna cause a stir. Well, that's gonna prevent the management and legislators from making tough fiscal decisions. These are very hard to measure. Organizational factors are. All right, financial factors. These are a list of of course, financial factors that will help you in analyzing a government's financial position. Basic categories. These are included, I think, 10.1, illustration 10.1 of your textbook. The revenues, the growth and diversity of revenue sources. Is it all coming from one thing, like property taxes? So if there's another real estate market meltdown, if your revenues are all coming from property taxes, it's going to take a big hit. As opposed to mixing it up with some revenue coming from property taxes, some from income taxes, some from sales taxes. Sales taxes historically tend to be the most stable. States that are heavily dependent on income taxes are the ones that have these big ups and downs whenever there's recessions or great economies, versus consumer spending generally remains strong even during a recession. Maybe not for high end items like televisions and things like that, but basic needs still have to be met, and people still spend in general, and that's proven to be true. Sales taxes are a more reliable form of revenue. Expenditures, these are priorities, mandates, and effectiveness of expenditures. Operating position, how strong is the fund balance? What are the operating results from a given government? Debt structure, are they looking at what is the long-term, short-term debt burden? Unfunded liabilities, which are killing states and localities around the country. And the condition of capital assets. Is there a lot of deferred maintenance? How much of your expenditures are going toward capital outlays? Financial analysis. On illustration 10.3 in the book, it's on page 424. It gives a list of ratios that can be used to analyze a government's financial statements. And a lot of these ratios are already obtainable from sections of the CAFR. But these ratios are they're the most useful when you're able to compare multi-year trends in these financial factors, or to compare between cities. We'll get into that benchmarking in a moment. Where do we get these financial ratios? The data for these can come from the introductory section, including the MD&A section of the CAFR, or the statistical sections. A lot of these ratios are already published there. Or you can get them from you can get the source data from 2 government-wide statements or the 7 fund financial statements. And the notes to the financial statements also will provide a lot of detailed account level information.